Getting gritty about engagement at work. Hey everyone, I am Leadership Development Coach Kathy Archer, and I am talking today about getting this engagement that we talked about on last week's Facebook Live session to increase in your organization for both yourself and those that you work with. So on last week's call, actually before we jump over there, I'm going to share this into my group. So last week's call, we talked about engagement and the fact that in many organizations, there are a ton of disengaged employees. And, sorry, loading. Have to do all of this extra stuff. About 30% of employees are engaged, meaning they love their work, they want to do their job, they show up for work excited, engaged, enthusiastic, put in the extra effort, go the extra mile. That's only about 30% of employees. So what about the rest? Well, the rest of them are putting in time. They're there because it's a paycheck. They really aren't connected. They're actually disengaged or actively disengaged. Those that are actively disengaged are, I'm going to share this quickly to the group. So if you are not in my Confident Leader, Women Leaders community, you should pop on over there and join it now. So that's a group for women leaders who want to grow and develop themselves. So I just shared this video in there so that those ladies can see it as well. So the other part of this group of employees is the 70% who are disengaged or actively disengaged. They really don't care. They have a whatever attitude. They show up for work simply because it's a paycheck. They're putting in time, or they're stirring the pot, making things worse for everyone else. So what we want to do for both ourselves and in our organizations is increase engagement. We want to take that 30% and grow it so that in your organization, there are 40 or 50 or 60% of the staff who are actively engaged, that want to show up for work every day. How do you do that? Well, we talked about some ways on the call last week, and I will share the link below after I'm done this session to last week's call. But let me kind of go through it again. There was 12 questions that Gallup has asked, and Gallup is the one who's done the study to look at employee engagement. And what I suggested was, when we look at those 12 questions, we often point our finger and we blame other people. So for example, one of the questions is, do I know what's expected of me at work? And we'll often say, well, nobody's ever sat down and done a proper orientation with me. Well, I don't even have a job description. Well, every day my job changes. And so we point the finger and we blame and we wait for somebody else to make the changes. What I suggested on last week's call is turn it around. And instead of playing victim, take responsibility for getting a sense of what your job duties are. Ask for clarity. Ask for, I have probably a boxer dog hair in my mouth. That's what lives in our house and floats around all the time. Instead of waiting for somebody else, instead of always expecting somebody else to solve the problem for you, fix things for you, give you clarity, that you need to ask for it. And so we went through these 12 questions and looked at, where can I take responsibility for my life? Where can I show up in my job, step forward, and become more engaged? And so if you want those 12 questions, there's a link in last week's Facebook Live where you can get those 12 questions and help you flip them around and look at how to take responsibility. But here's the thing. When you hit those challenges, when you try and make some of those shifts in your work, what we notice is it gets really difficult. It gets really hard. It gets stressful. And so how do you make those shifts so that you can start to feel more engaged long term? What it takes is grittiness. Grit is a term that's been researched by Angela Duckworth, and how she defines it is perseverance and passion for long-term goals. When we persist, when we persevere, when we dig deep for what we believe in over the long term, we start to make some of those shifts. So for example, years ago, I decided that it was time for me to go back to school and get my management degree. That took 8 years. One course after another, 8 years later, I graduated with my degree. That was in the middle of raising 4 kids, working full time, changing positions, doing the stuff that we normally are challenged with in life. So how did I stick with it for 8 years? Grit, perseverance, and passion for long-term goals. I persisted, even on days when I didn't feel like studying, even on days when, the kids were sick, even on days when I had lots going on at work. I, had a passion. I knew that I wanted to get this degree. I knew it was important for me to increase my leadership skills. I knew leadership was something I wanted to do, was good at, but could do better at. And long term, I just didn't give up day after day after day. And that's what Angela Duckworth has found, is that it takes that long-term persistence to stick with things. So if we're looking at, I wrote a blog post today about what helps to increase that engagement is your attitude. It's your mindset. And that just by shifting your mindset, that's not going to dramatically change things for sure, but it will gradually change things over time. But when somebody else, makes a comment, it's easy to just go, this is a waste of time. Who thought that I could, change the attitude in our organization, and just walk away? But when we say, okay, I get it that maybe they're not ready to make the shifts, I get it that I'm not quite there yet, then we can persist and say, that's okay. I'll try again. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, get knocked down 7 times, get up 8. That's grit, right? Every single time we get hit or banged or knocked down, we have to turn around and get back up. When you're trying to change the culture of an organization, when you're trying to create an environment that's more friendly and engaging and positive and open and warm and friendly and making a big difference, and you're getting hit with somebody else's mood, somebody else's to-do list, somebody else's attitude, and it's easy to just sort of say, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. I'm tired. I'm just going to come and show up and get my paycheck and go home because nobody else seems to care. But if you're like me, you do care, and you care a lot. And in order to stick with it and shift what's going on for you and your team, you've got to get gritty. So how do you develop your grit? There's a cheat sheet, a guide that I'm going to connect below called Increasing Your Grit. And so on this, you can pop over and there's a link to Angela Duckworth's grit score. So again, she's the researcher that's been doing all of this stuff around, what is it that makes Marines and, people in the Army stick with it long term versus the ones that drop out? She did lots of research with National Spelling Bee in the States. Why do some kids make it to the top of the National Spelling Bee and others drop out? And she's developed this grit test. And so what I want you to do is pop over and get your current grit score and then look at, okay, so what can I do to increase it? Where am I now, but what is it that I want to do? And so Angela talks about 4 ways that we can increase our grit scores. The first is to become more interested in what we do, then to practice the skills around that, connect to the purpose of the work we're doing, and to awaken a sense of hopefulness, not hopelessness, that's where many of us are, hopefulness for what we're doing. So interest, practice, purpose, and hope. So let me kind of walk you through what that might look like. When I was in my organization, I was working on parenting skills. We were teaching parenting. We were working with families connected to the child protection system, and so lots of stuff around discipline and, how do you set consequences for kids and all that kind of stuff. But somewhere along the way, what we realized and what was happening provincially and nationally was that a lot of the families we were working with were struggling with FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome. Either the parents and or the kids that we were working with were affected. And so how were you going to teach consequences to somebody who had, challenges mentally and emotionally and cognitively, right? And so we really started to look at gaining more understanding of FASD and getting more diagnosis for our clients and stuff. I took a whole new interest in a whole new area. So it went beyond basic parenting and it grew. And that reignited my interest. It re-engaged me in my work and it pulled me in, right? So that's interest. Practice. in order for me to increase that, level of interest, I had to take training. I went all over, to the Edmonton and to Cold Lake and to Vancouver, Victoria to take training. So I was traveling around learning and growing and, reading, and I was bringing experts up to our community to train my staff. And so we had to not only have the interest, but we also had to learn and grow and take that practice, develop the habit of practicing in that area. We also had to connect that to purpose. Why? What was the point in doing all of this work? Because honestly, it was a lot of work. I ended up sitting on provincial boards, and I ended up being involved in regional committees, and it added to my workload. I was, doing way more than I had been the year before that. But what I realized was, if I was going to make a difference for the families that I was working with, if the staff that I was supervising were going to be able to feel they were more successful in their work, we needed to have a better understanding of FASD. And so that helped me reconnect to that purpose. And then finally, the last one around hope. It wasn't easy. There was many organizations vying for the same funding, trying to figure out how to do this. And so we had to be hopeful that, whether we were successful in getting funding or whether somebody else was, or whatever was happening, that we were going to start pulling people in, that we could make that difference. And we had to, keep that hope alive despite the challenges. We were talking about bringing diagnostic teams, so OTs and psychologists to remote reserves in Northern Alberta. It just seemed impossible at times. But we had to keep that hope alive in us that we could do that. And that's what that grittiness is about. So grittiness, again, is about, finding an interest. And so for many of us, when we become disengaged in our jobs, it's because we've lost interest. We're bored. We don't care anymore. We just aren't connected to the work we do. So reconnect to what interests you in your job. And if you don't have something, make something, find something, explore options. And then practice, get better at it, learn, grow, develop in that area. Connect that purposely to, why am I making this difference? And then finally, hope. Reignite that hope in you. Figure out, what is it that I'm hopeful about? And so that's what the worksheet's about that I'm going to connect to this, link to this after, is figure out your grit score and then go through those 4 areas: interest, practice, purpose, and hope, and see how you can increase your grit. Because if you want to become more engaged in your job, if you want to become more connected at work, it doesn't happen overnight. It is a long-term commitment. And you need to get back up 8 times when you get knocked down 7. You need to keep at it again and again and again and again. This is not easy work. It's not for the faint of heart. But if you're like me, and I am assuming you are if you're watching this, it matters to you. You care deeply about this work and you want to make a difference. And so in order to do that, you've got to increase your grit. And that's how you do it. So if you have any questions, pop them below for me. Ask me any questions you want. But go and get the guide so that you can get your grit score and that you can increase your grit so that you can re-engage in work and increase that number around you of the engaged people that you work with and that you supervise. Thanks for listening today, guys. Again, if you have any questions, pop them below and I will answer them even after the live session. But make sure that you pop onto the link that I'm going to put in the video and get your grit score and start to increase your grit today. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.